Welcome to our webinar series specifically for governing bodies and to support all governing bodies Australia-wide. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are presenting this webinar today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I would like to extend those respects to any First Nations people who may be here today. The topic, as we mentioned, is on governance and finance, and specifically focused on governing body level. And obviously, this is the third part of our series. And also, before we go into the meat and potatoes of the session, I want to thank our partners. I want to thank the Australian Sports Foundation, who've been long partners of ours on the screen, as you can see, and also Active Queensland Industry Alliance. I'll be presenting today. My background is professional sport for 2 decades. Been doing this business for close on a decade. Ken Jacobs, former Cricket Victoria CEO who works for us part-time, has had senior roles at obviously 27 years as CEO of Cricket Victoria, but senior roles at the ICC World Cup and Tennis Victoria. So Ken will be helping us today. So welcome, Ken. I want to briefly talk about who we are and what we do, and that's particularly the first timers that are here today. We've worked with a lot of governing bodies, and we've worked with lots of clubs over the journey. Basically, we support all levels of sport, and this webinar series has been derived after working with 100 governing bodies over a period of time. And what we have found out is they have a lot of pain points and a lot of pressure points themselves. So we're going to walk through what they are, and then so this is the framework of what we're going to cover today. So, as I mentioned, we've worked with 100 governing bodies. We've got thousands and thousands of data points. Many of our governing bodies are just surviving and not thriving, and we've identified some gaps in sport, and basically a lot of our governing bodies, they know something's not quite right, but they don't know where to go for help if they do need help. So hopefully we can provide part of that solution today. This current slide. When we did the review, we actually did a large review of 60 SSOs in Queensland, and these are the pain points that not just clubs were experiencing, but the associations and the governing bodies. So we're dealing finance and governance today. The first 2 webinars we'll be doing one a month, pretty much one a month all year round. Well, the last one will be in August, but we've already done board administration 2 months ago in October, or 3 months ago now, and we had planning, and also we obviously got finance and governance. So that's what we're dealing with today's topic, but it does show the pressure that are on the various governing bodies around the country. Now, a lot of which I think is really important to assess what is a governing body, and we find obviously there's a lot of our governing bodies are supporting our community clubs, which you can see here, but the governing bodies can be from the blue up to the top. It could be whether it's a national body, whether it's state body, whether it's the hub or the region or leagues or association. We find sometimes our governing bodies are so resource thin that councils need to provide support to some of their community clubs, because a lot of the sports may not necessarily have the resources to support the clubs that they would like to. And obviously, we're going to talk about, I suppose, the pain points and the pressures that are on all these various levels around the country and hopefully some solutions that we'll talk about. Obviously, actually, we might, before we kick into the framework of the session, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to do a little poll right now. So everyone can learn from each other. So hopefully that's come up on your screen. The first question is, tick the box that's relatable to you. They can choose more than one, Jono, can they?
Yeah, so they select the financial reports you have in place for the first question. Should be able to pick more than one. Then second question is a couple of governance. Does your organisation have a visual board structure? Do all directors have a portfolio? That sort of thing. And then the last question, select the plans and processes you have in place for governance, and then how many webinars you've attended. So a few quick questions. If you could spend a minute or so and answer those, would be great to get feedback and input.
So whilst the poll is going on, if everyone could spend 20 seconds completing that will help all the attendees here today. So the framework of what we're going to cover today is the current landscape. what's actually happening in the current landscape. We're then going to go through some tips, not just for clubs, but for obviously governing bodies, specifically tips for governing bodies on how to improve their financial systems and also their governance process. And then we will finish with how Club Map can help. We'll keep while that poll's still going. And obviously, these are the areas that we've assessed, and that poll, we'll let that poll go for another 30 seconds and we'll show the results in a second. But these are the areas that when we've done the reviews of the various governing bodies, these are the areas that we've assessed, and we've got lots and lots of data. And, obviously we're assessing the composition of the board, the administration sponsorship. The two topics that are highlighted today are pretty much, we'll go into more depth with that today, and hopefully that'll make a little bit more sense. So, Joe, why don't we end that poll and just show those results? I think and we'll walk through the results. Okay. Finance essentials. 71% have a budget, tick. 93% have a profit and loss, tick. As I'm an accountant by trade, so when I see year-end forecasting, that's at 34%, 36%. That's well below where it should be. Long-term business planning, 36%. Cash flow projections, 29%. So other than a profit and loss and a budget, the rest are probably unders for me in terms of where they should be. Governance essentials. Does your governing body have a visual structure? I like it, 79%. So when we say visual structure, a visual structure of what it looks like, and we're going to give you some examples of those today. Do all directors have a portfolio? This is the one that worries me. We have a lot of boards that have the chairman and might have a secretary and treasurer and VP, and then you've got general board members, rather than having a specific role to play. And we'll give you some live examples. Governance essentials. Select the plans and process you have in place. So 21% have had independent review. 57% have an up-to-date strategic plan. 43% have a risk register. 43% have a contract register. So risk and contract register for governing bodies, I would say that needs to be a lot higher than that. And obviously the independent reviews, which we'll touch a little bit on this session, is obviously light on to how many Club Up webinars, and that's fine. So that's a good exercise to go through, because it actually shows that what others, particularly those that are tuning in today, what the lay of the land is for them. So we're going to go into this framework here, and I might get Ken to help me in a second, but these are the data that we've captured. These are all out of 5. The greens are the I suppose the pass bar, but the ones down the bottom, particularly contract register and risk register, we sort of identified that. The business plan is probably similar. A lot of our governing bodies may not have a business plan. So just for those that are not clear on what a business plan is, a budget is typically a 12-month projection. A business plan is a lot longer, the 3 to 5 year projections on where you need to be. And basically, we're going to cover some of those topics today. And I think, Ken, is there any particular topics you think, Ken, from your end that really that the governing bodies that are tuning in today should be focusing on?
Well, Terry, when you look at the governance areas, they're all sort of high-level areas, and it's when you drill down into each of the categories that there's a lot of the detail and a lot of work required to ensure things are done the way they should be done, even down to how board meetings are conducted, and the time taken to deal with strategy rather than operational issues. And that's what the board should be focusing on, not operational issues. But all of those areas are very important, and it does take time. And look, with this these headings here, we're not in any way pointing fingers at anyone, but we're just sort of pointing out that problems can go wrong at the very top level, in the highest level of sport. And not only these sports from these articles that we've seen here have experienced problems in recent times, but other national bodies have suffered or have been going through some pretty tough governance issues. Swimming Australia is one that had some issues in recent times. As I said, we're not pointing the finger, we're just highlighting that what can happen no matter what level you're at. And if these sort of things are happening at the top level, then it can have an impact on the sport overall, right down to the grassroots, because the national body can't devote as much time to what it could be doing to help the grassroots, because it's got to fix up its own issues at the top level.
100%, 100%. So that sort of leads us into part two. So part one is the lay of the land, and there is some gaps at governing body level that definitely needs some support. So we're going to give you some finance and governance tips, which probably where this pretty much my wheelhouse been for the last couple of decades in terms of working for high profile sporting bodies. So we're going to start with finance. And again, I'm going to give you some live examples of what I think every governing body should receive from your treasurer. And there's really three reports. And when I was working at some of the biggest clubs in AFL in Australia, it's the same model, but they're just obviously there was probably some more zeros than some of the others. But basically, we're going to walk through three examples of what every governing body should receive, and I'm going to show you. So, for example, this is just emphasising a small snapshot of a P&L and a budget and a forecast. You know, often organisations have budgets, right? But they don't present it in a format. Look, how are we comparing with the prior year? How are we comparing the budget? How are we comparing? Do we have a month-to-date, year-to-date P&L? For me, the most important role of any finance director or treasurer of a sporting body is to forecast where you're going to finish. And so that's the forecast. So here's a good example. Digital social media. We generated 29,550 last year. Our budget was 30. We're only 3 months in. We're big bank 2 in the month, 7 for the quarter. We're probably not going to get the 29.5. So it's the plus minus. What boards don't, not saying they mind losses, but they do mind losses if they come as a surprise. There's lots of sports that I could mention that a lot of skeletons can flush out at the end of the financial year, particularly when the auditors are in place. So the thing I like about this, and when I was wearing my finance hat, this is the whole business on one page. How are you tracking to prior year? How are you tracking this year? How's your forecast? And comparing it to your budget. Typically what I find, a lot of our organisations have all the revenue at the top and all the expenses down the bottom, and they don't have cost centres, and just makes it really difficult. And hopefully the management reports can put that in place. Now, most organisations, if they're going to get in trouble, it's usually the revenue they fall shy on. And if you look at this slide here, I've just given you 9 examples of income that a potentially governing body could generate on the left in the first column. What we find with most governing bodies and most clubs, they don't allocate the green. Who's responsible? Who's responsible for the various areas? And it's typically left to the secretary and the treasurer, and hence, you know, who's in charge of grants? You know, who's in charge of the affiliation and membership? The treasurer. Who's in charge of sponsorship? The commercial ops person. My strong advice to anyone who's tuning in today, if you've got a finance person, if they could present that to your board level on at least a monthly or bi-monthly basis, that is gold. So, and see these plus minuses here, they're the movements. As we know, budgets are out of date the day after you do them. So you need to, and there's obviously decisions that are made during the year that you need to track plus minus. So that's the second report. The third report is, and I've just used it for this exercise, revenue. I haven't touched on expenditure, but the same philosophy applies. So if you look at these, see these 8,000 on here, go back to here, 8,000. So basically, we're tracking all the movements. What are the wins we've had? What are the hits we've had? If your board could get that one pager, that track your revenue and have an exception report, and we all know there's things that come up during a financial year for whatever reason that are outside your control, or the board has made a decision to change the landscape in terms of their budget, which they can do, but it's more about accounting for it. So just a few little finance tips that I find that this report, the revenue and the tracking report, and going back to the first report, the forecasting, I'm not saying it's non-existent, but it's in the minority for sure. So just definitely keep that on everyone's mind in terms of finances. Obviously, again, good to hear that most the people that are tuning in today have a strategic plan, but the financial business plan extending longer than 12 months is important, and that can build stability and resilience. They then start to allocate strategic resources and typically track your capital investment. Like there's obviously the P&L or profit and loss never captures capital expenditure. It usually sits out of your P&L. But again, by having a long-term plan, financial plan, that promotes long-term sustainability and growth. So again, I think we had 40% that had a business plan. So again, I think that's something that all levels should seriously consider. So governance essentials. So obviously when we do a governance, we're going to touch on some of the key points. We could do governance for hours, couldn't we, Ken? But we've really put out some key focus points in terms of, so I might get you to work through this slide, Ken.
Sure, thanks, Terry. As you said, we're looking to not touch on everything, but just focus on a few that, on occasions, some organisations can tend to overlook them, not necessarily deliberately. It just happens because of the day-to-day pressures in business that arise, and this can happen because of a range of things. And as outlined here, quite often, and Terry asked the question before about, or it was in the poll about directors having specific portfolios. There can be, on occasions, no clear understanding of the role and responsibilities of people on the board or in a specific role on a committee. Succession planning is one that is often overlooked and perhaps doesn't get addressed until at the last minute, which it shouldn't. It should be one of the first things that an incoming chairman or board person or a treasurer or whatever should be thinking about down the track. Of course, one of the old age questions of recent times and perhaps forever is that majority of work can be done by so too few people, and that's not good value for anyone, whether for those people involved or for the club, because they carry so much knowledge with them. Limited resources, both personnel-wise, it can be financial, it can be a whole range of issues, facilities. Quite often, a board or an executive committee can be too focused on the day-to-day operations rather than looking at the bigger picture of the club or an association. And everyone does have a bigger picture. Even if you are just a community club, there is a bigger picture for the club going forward in the future. It's not just national and state bodies that should have a bigger picture focus on things.
I think for me, that model there, which is how a good percentage of governing bodies operate, the general board member, that results in 3 or 4 people doing 90% of the work because they don't have the portfolio allocated. And so we put forward, we're going to show you a bit of an example of, this is a medium-sized organisation. We've de-identified it on the premise that we don't want to raise something that they may not like to be made public, but this is just a live example of a medium-sized association. They have those key points there. Then general committee. And basically, I say this every time I get the chance to, where it doesn't matter what level of sport we're working with, until you get your structure sorted, everything is hard. Till you get your structure sorted, everything is difficult because it falls back on those 3 or 4 people. So that's the before. I'm now going to show the after. And again, the red boxes is just an example of an organisation we work with. They had no one overseeing revenue. No one overseeing revenue. A board that had no one overseeing the commercial aspects of the organisation. They had no one overseeing strategic and even development, the support of clubs. This is an organisation that didn't have any full-time staff, and we did and they were well-resourced and they were profitable, and the right people will pay their way. if you get the model right. And we proposed, you can see the before here, which was just, and now we're saying, literally, if you're on the board, you have a role. You have a specific role to play. Again, emphasising the visual aspect of this, not just a list of names, a visual aspect that is promoted as far and wide as you wish. So again, that's just a really good example of, it's simple, and Ken, you might jump in here, but allocating responsibilities. And remember that revenue slide I showed that had people's names against it? Commercial ops, the different portfolios, and that holds people to account. Ken?
And I think, Terry, too, just to emphasise that this is a very real, live example that Terry's talking about. I mean, people sometimes say to us, "Oh, that couldn't happen in this day and age." It does, and this is a medium-sized state body that we've been dealing with in recent times, where they haven't had a structure in place to manage their affairs, and it's been done. The work's been done by 3 or 4 people, and certainly understand all the issues about you've got to have volunteers, or you've got to have part-time staff or full-time staff to deal with things, but unless you look at the structure and say, okay, how can we fill these positions, you'll go nowhere. You'll just run into the same old brick wall.
Susan just put in a note, this all depends on having the volunteers to fill this number. If you have this structure in front of you right now, people will see how hard 3 or 4 people are working, and they go, gee, you've got to be careful here. If I get too close, I could end up in a big black hole I can't get out of. However, if you start to divvy up say, look, we need someone to oversee X, oversee Y, then they're one piece of a bigger puzzle. Don't underestimate that importance of having allocated portfolios accordingly. So, Ken, independent reviews, do you want to, and again, actually, I might get you to talk about the importance of independent reviews. And I think we had about 20% when we did the survey at the front.
Yes, and I think the importance of this is it's independent reviews. It's bringing independent reviews can bring fresh eyes to the table, fresh ideas, and can help in some ways revitalise clubs and associations. And it also removes any possibility of any possible conflicts of interest through doing things internally, and that does happen. But it's the importance of being able to say, look, we've done this, had an independent review undertaken of our organisation. That's important when it comes to issues like dealing with your local council or your local and state government. And you can get people provide grants for this type of thing. But it's an independent review, as I said, can bring fresh ideas, a fresh look at the whole organisation, both the structure, the finances, etc., and even the brand. It might be from a marketing perspective.
And ultimately, that leads, the good thing to see today is that 3 in 4 of the organisations who did the poll had a strategic plan that was updated. Lots of organisations have a strategic plan. It may not be updated. A lot of our organisations, if things are a little bit messy, depending on their financial circumstance, we strongly encourage to do a review before you do your plan. Do an independent assessment accordingly, and not the other way around. So ideally, the review should flush out some of the challenges and opportunities that could potentially be incorporated in the plan. And obviously, strategic plan as a governing body, I think, and it should be a minimum standard. And it's great to see that there's far more that do have a strategic plan than not. My only concern sometimes is it can sit in the top drawer of the filing cabinet, and someone pulls it out once a year, and they don't focus on it accordingly. And obviously, and setting key targets and objectives is really important, and tracking those objectives.
And that's important, Terry, as well. Why we talk about having specific portfolios within a board for directors. That you don't want a strategic plan to be done and have it printed off and a nice glossy publication and then put in the drawer. You want it to be live and people referring to it on a day-to-day basis, and for board directors can have responsibilities for various elements of that strategic plan.
Perfect. We've hopefully anyone who's been tuning into the content we've been delivering for the last few years, you would have heard of Tidy HQ. Isaac there's a real disconnect with our governing bodies, with their CRMs and connecting the national, state, sometimes leagues, associations with clubs. Isaac has designed a product, and I think it's worth exploring. If you feel your CRM and data is not exactly where it needs to be, but here's some sort of key tips. Is it's designed to enhance the governance framework and connections between the various stakeholders. It's got a centralised project and task management. It's a role-based task assignment, direct communication channels, and you get real-time reporting and compliance tracking. And again, if we could nearly do a session just on databases, CRMs, what's all sports seem to do. They have their registration platforms, which is pretty consistent, but their connection of a CRM between the various stakeholders inside the one sport seems to be disconnected. So if you think that is your sport, then it's something you seriously should, we should. Do you want to put in Isaac's details in the chat, Jono? And I think it'd be worth, if you feel that's you, then you should look at that. Ken, you might touch on some key documents that are often missed, and I think the survey showed we had about 2 out of 10 that had both of these, 2 or 3 out of 10. So,
and these are issues that can be put aside to a later date when to be updated and so forth, because it can be a time-consuming process, but they are absolutely essential for all organisations from a governance perspective. And the risk register nowadays can include things like even maintaining a register of working with children checks for your coaches, or police checks, or whatever it might be required for coaches or team managers, etc., etc. Contracts, you might think, well, hang on, we're only a small organisation, we don't have contracts with anyone, but you'll have you might have sponsorship contracts. Your lease with the council is in effect a contract. You might have if you're a professional organisation with professional athletes, you'll have contracts with employees, professional athletes, government departments for grants. You enter into a grant agreement, which is in effect a contract. All of these things need to be maintained and placed on appropriate record and data. And the critical dates issue, point 4 that's listed there, the critical date of any contract is not when it concludes. That means it's too late to have just be thinking the critical date is the end of the term, because you need to be reviewing all of your contracts well before the date of expiration, whether they be sponsorship, player contracts, government grants, etc., etc. And there are various reporting requirements under contract. So both of these registers are very, very vital, particularly from a handover perspective too, when positions change on a board.
Yeah, look, the biggest concern when I was holding these sort of level of roles is missing key dates. You might have a lease that expires X, but the renewal period is 12 months or 6 months earlier. So there is software out there for contract registers where you can actually get automated emails and you can put into your system. So if you feel you've got some key contracts that they can easily be missed.
Absolutely essential. When I was at Cricket Victoria, Terry, a requirement virtually pretty well for every board meeting was our chairman used to say to me, I want to make sure we've got our contracts register at every board meeting. To ensure
it could be
that
all levels. It
complying.
could be employment contracts for key staff. It could be, said leaseholds. It could be, I could list 1,000 different options, but in terms of this key piece of the puzzle. So Ken, you might just keep extending on this, and obviously
So sport, this is again another area that's grown immensely in recent years, and for all the right reasons. But clubs and associations need to ensure that they are complying with all the requirements that are necessary, be they a member protection policy, as listed here, child protection, anti-doping, gambling and competition manipulation policies, which is in effect match fixing. Now you might think, oh, hang on, we're just a suburban club. That aren't really necessary to us, but they do apply. I mean, there've been some fairly well publicised cases of competition fixing in the sports of tennis and in football, i.e. soccer. That's occurred. there's a whole range of issues, and it puts obviously more pressure on volunteers, on boards to comply with all these areas. But there are resources available through Sport Integrity Australia is listed there, but also Play by the Rules provides good support. But it's just essential. This is all part of good governance to have these policies in place to deal with all these important issues that arise now.
Brilliant. So obviously, there's some key tips. We could probably spend hours on just governance, but we've pulled out some gold nuggets that hopefully will help. We'll share that. I think we're sharing these slides. I think we are, Jono. I'm not so sure, but I'm assuming we'll post the recording up as well for those, particularly those who want to share it with any other directors of your organisation. So a lot of actually, I'll just go back a slide, but a lot of our organisations, and they know something's not quite right, but they don't know where to go for help. And we've got a bit of a concern with, I suppose, the imbalance on, core business versus development, which is participation typically. A lot of our sports are all driven about participation. And obviously, we just find that all the energy is going to participation and driving that aspect of it. But the governing body and the club development, it's sort of out of whack a bit, right? And we just find, we think it's great for the sports to grow, but unless you've got the back of house sorted, it becomes, problematic to an extent. Obviously, we're going to show you a program that's been, we've just signed and I'll give you some live examples of sports and councils that we've worked with. So what we're talking about today is highly applicable, not just to governing bodies, but also councils. So we've developed this club development program. And as I said earlier, a lot of our organisations do not know where to go for support. And I'm going to list some of the benefits before we go into the actual program. And it's what we're trying to do is how can we touch every single administrator in the country in the most efficient and effective and affordable way to really support our governing bodies. Like, I'd love everyone to read this report. We did a particular state body of 60 SSOs. There's some serious red flags around the country. And, I'd like to think that, our depth of knowledge is as wide as any in this space. So when you've got a development program, obviously the governing bodies can focus on their core business. And we do find that councils typically have to fill sometimes a gap that the governing bodies are resourced in. And we find that councils can focus more on their own, getting their own ducks in a row as well. And we find that any sports that have got development staff, we do find that area of sport is high turnover. We find this is a great PD, a great professional development aspect of all those that are in those roles. And then ultimately it flows down to our clubs who can grow and thrive and they get more revenue and then your participation becomes the key and getting that balance right. So this is the program we've launched, and I'm going to show you just a handful that we've signed up recently. Again, we've built this model purely on the basis of getting to every single sport in Australia. We've customised this health check, which is a simple 10 to 15 minute health check. I think it's John. I'm not sure if we're going to give people access to the health check or not, but I think it's a great starting point for a lot of our governing bodies because they know things aren't quite right. And it's all about everything we deal with is off field, off pitch, off court. This is all the admin, governance, finance, revenue, commercial side. We've developed this amazing resources hub, which is the how to grow the key components. And we're going to dive into a bit more depth to that as we go on. We do, obviously this is one webinar for a governing body, but we do a lot of free webinars. I'm going to, for your clubs on a Monday night, they're going to be relaunched in the 12th. And a lot of our governing bodies want to analyse all the data that comes through and an online community. We do a lot of other workshops, but what you see in front of you is at a fraction of the price if you had to put someone as a full-time employee to run your club development and help your organisation. So here's 5 live examples of bodies that have committed to this program. We only launched this in October. Bowls Australia have signed up 1,800 clubs. So all the headings up the top, they're going to do all their health checks. They want all the education. They're happy to do their own data. They want to run a frequent webinar series. They want direct phone support, online community support. And our workshops, they don't want it. They said, look, the clubs, if they want to do workshops, they can. Burdekin Council did 100 clubs, 100 health checks, Resources Hub, you get the gist, yeah? This is City of Stirling, and we've actually superseded this. They've just gone to another 25 clubs in terms of online health check and Resources Hub, and they're paying for some workshops, you know, the one-on-one hand-holding for particularly some of those sports that are on, not saying on their knees, but need support. This is a league governing body, 32 clubs. They've chosen, look, we want the health checks, we want the resources, we want data, and we want a few webinars. And this is a council in Perth, 20 clubs, you get the gist. So it's a bit of a pick and pack model. If you've, again, some of our sports, they may or may not have someone supporting club development, but if they do, they're normally wearing 4 or 5 other hats at the same time. So it's sort of set up to fail a little bit. I'd be worth everyone, this is a bit of a sample. I'd encourage everyone to trial, go into our, see that connection there, type that in, hub.clubmap.com.au. That's our new resources hub. It is unbelievably good. It's all, so you'll get a sample, a trial of, it's about 5% of our content. That'll give you a really good flavour. If you're a governing body that would like to support your clubs, but you do not know how, that I'd check that out as a very much a first thing to check out. So that's it's a free trial. You know, it's really powerful, and we've spent a lot of time building that. So just to summarise the session, and we'll have a few Q&As after this, but how governance and finance support sustainability. Obviously, the key is to promote an efficient structure with defined roles and responsibilities. As I said earlier, until you get that sorted, it's going to be hard to move forward in a positive way. Reporting is more effective. The transparency and accountability. I reckon 9 out of 10, if you could get those 3 one-pages, the financials, the P&L, the forecast, the budget, the prior year, then the revenue tracking and the exception report, if you could provide that to your board, that is pure gold. Pure gold. Because a lot of our sports aren't doing it. Planning is easier. Clear roadmap. Obviously, that's where you got your business plan and your strategic plan, and obviously depending if you want to support your community clubs that sit underneath that. Core business can thrive. And stability promotes confidence. And again, it goes back to a lot of our sporting bodies. They want to. I presented to one on Monday. What's today? Tuesday, Friday, and I left there thinking, this sporting body is under real pressure, and they don't have the systems, and they're sort of not saying flying by the seat of their pants, but it's a real concern. When I got off that session about it, this was a national body. And I'm thinking, no, it was just some serious concerns. So there is help out there, but a lot of our governing bodies don't know where to go to. Good examples have positive influence on lower tiers. So that's ultimately the key questions. I think it might, and what we might do, John, we might bring up a poll. Or do you want to do yeah? So if anyone, there's a couple of quick polls here. Would anyone like to have a chat to Ken or I or Rick? Would you like a chat? Would you like some information about our club development program? And would you like to complete a survey? So if anyone, I'd encourage at a minimum, everyone wearing your governing body hat should do the free survey. And that's a good starting point. So again, the QR code is there. John, I think, post the link, the QR code if you want to scan it and do it that particular way. But again, the great thing about this opportunity is that it can be completely, totally scalable. And, it's pretty powerful. And I said, if anyone has got a contact with Bowls Australia, we're 4 months in. The impact that we've had with that sport has been phenomenal. I'm happy for anyone to ring the key players at Bowls and the impact that's had. it's been quite incredible. But again, but the model is completely transferable to everyone else. So, and just before we go into a Q&As, if you're a governing body, these are the free webinars we offer. So we offer these typically all year round with a few weeks break between each one. This is our new series. I think this is series 11. But today is very much about the governing body focus. If you want to support your community clubs and you're struggling, feel free to promote these free webinars to your community clubs. And that's launched in 2 weeks yesterday, I think 2 weeks Monday or 2 weeks yesterday, 2 weeks yesterday. So again, also, if anyone wants to follow our journey, we've got the one on the left, Club Map, our standard page. We've got about 3,000 people, clubs, sports that follow that. The one on the right is a community page where community organisations can solve problems amongst themselves. So basically, I'd really encourage you to do that. So we might, John, over to you. Why don't you put any questions, and then anyone will take some questions from the floor at the end if you like.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So just a quick one that did pop up that I saw from Patricia was best way to get an independent review. You would have seen as Ken was talking to that slide, there's a few examples of some that we've done. We can do them. If you'd like some more information, feel free to tick that box. We've done, I couldn't tell you how many in the last couple of years, TD, probably a dozen or so big independent reviews of various size organisations. So we're happy to help there, or happy to at least steer in the right direction. So feel free to reach out for a chat there. There was a couple of good questions that came through the registrations. One from Olaf was just regarding governance structures for small not-for-profit sporting associations and their individual clubs, where those clubs are individually responsible for their management, consistent with a broader constitution. A
long question.
It's a wordy one. Ken, I know I shared this one with you a little bit earlier. Do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, it's I'm guessing a model, a structure, and how our thoughts on what that could look like for a governing body to share with their sport.
Well, there are model constitutions that sit in most states that through Department of Consumer Affairs or Sport and Rec as well that have them. And it's really you need to look at, okay, one size doesn't fit all. It might need to be adjusted for a particular sport or particular needs or the size of the sport. But then it should, look, we can send examples of model constitutions to people, but they need to be reviewed probably on an annual basis as well, because circumstances change and needs change. But no, there's no one size fits all, that's for sure. But there are organisations who deal specifically, who can help specifically with constitutions that need to be developed for whatever the purpose might be.
And yeah, thanks, Ken. I know you've had a chat to Anne about this recently as well. It is a tricky one and very specific, so it's probably worth another discussion. I'm not sure, but what to consider if two clubs are working towards a lease between clubs, leasing parts of playing surfaces or other facilities. What's involved in that sort of process?
Well, we haven't got time to go into all the detail, but a few things that come to the top of mind are firstly the term of the lease or the sublease. Does the party that holds the lease to the facility have the right to sublet to another partner? Is an important consideration. No point entering into a sublease if they don't have the right to do that. Whose responsibility for the maintenance of what the sharing of responsibilities are regarding the maintenance of the facility, the rental, obviously. If there's a dispute, is there a dispute resolution process in place if the parties, for whatever, can't agree on certain issues? Another thing that comes to mind would be, is there a get-out clause that you might enter into a 3-year lease, and then after 12 months think, oh, this is not quite what we thought. how can we get out of this? There are obviously others as well. That's a starting point, though.
Yeah, it's a bit of a deep dive, that one. But yeah, feel free if anyone's got any last minute questions. They were the two that came through the registrations there. If anyone's got some other questions, feel free to put them in the chat or jump off mute. We can have a quick chat now if you wish.
If anyone wants to ask direct questions, we can do that now, as Johnny just said, or we're pretty much on time. We've done pretty well. We usually have 40 minutes to present and then 10 minutes for the Q&A. So we're making good time. But
Terry, I think Shiv had to drop off, but he sent me from the city. He sent me a question about dealing with conflicts of interest and how do you deal with them? And I think how does a board deal with them, or the senior management? And I think the key is that they have to be declared as the starting point that there is a conflict, and then it's a matter of, most people take the view, look, there can be a conflict of interest. It's how you deal with them and how you manage them, and whether it be not just directors but senior management might have a conflict of interest somewhere along the line, and it's declaring them and then how you deal with them from there on.
And so I think if typically as part of the induction of the directors, that should be covered to make sure that anyone's not impacted, or you don't want that. It can be a messy track if you don't declare your various conflicts accordingly, and it won't be the first time, or there's plenty of times it'll continue to happen again. So I really encourage everyone. So we might just wind it up there. We're literally leading up to 2:50. Hopefully you got some really good tips out of today's sessions. I want to thank you for everyone for giving up your time, and if anyone's ticked a box wanting some extra information, we'll be back to you inside 24, 48 hours. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Over and out from us, and take care.